right. I'm so excited to have you here, Michelle. It was I remember like when we usually like talk, we have like our regular like chats, like
Yeah.
catching up. And I remember that when we were talking and we usually could speak for, I don't know, like 2 hours, 3 hours. And at some point I had like an idea like that would be cool to record that because most of the stuff that we are talking about is basically about the insomnia recovery and our insights. And we share a lot of great stuff, I think. And I just like realized that yeah, we can do something like this.
Yeah.
So I'm super glad and super thankful that you found time to come here. And basically for anyone who just maybe like tuning in and listening to this, if they happen to not know you, but I would say many people know you from the Sleep Coach School, basically maybe it will be great to introduce your recovery story, how it
Sure.
was going for you, maybe some brief sentences.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me today. And, it's so true. We've had so many good chats, and why not turn one into content,
Yeah.
right? So, absolutely. So, I'm Michelle. I'm a fellow sleep coach. And in terms of my own recovery process, I know that, and I've shared this before, I struggled with really, really, fairly severe insomnia for about 5 years. And I think just like so many other people that I've worked with, I really did believe there was something really terribly physically wrong with me. My brain was broken, my body was broken, and I felt very hopeless a lot of the time as a result. And really spent years and years not understanding what was going on, living in a lot of fear, chasing every single physical symptom that I was having, and just really just feeling very confused and in the dark and very scared a lot of the time. And so for me, finding out and sort of finally understanding that insomnia is, for so many of us, such a fear-driven process, was really big. It started to allow me to understand that, okay, I'm not completely broken. I'm not uniquely severe. I'm not all these things. And there's actually something that I can do. I can change this. I don't have to, spend the rest of my life here. And so I, started to kind of view insomnia really differently, more through that lens of anxiety, which was hugely helpful. And as a result, I started to work with it really differently. And so, really, my recovery process was really starting with a lot of education to understand what was going on so that I could shift into this new perspective and way of being with it. And from there, I think I had a very, I want to say, very typical journey. It was not short. I think there's a misconception, and we'll probably talk more about this in our talk today, that it's like a really fast process to be able to, or if it's not fast, there's something wrong.
Yep.
But my recovery process was fairly long. I had lots of ups and downs, lots of speed bumps, all of that. And overall, it was a fairly, I want to say, it was an experience that changed me in so many ways that I wanted to become a sleep coach. And so that's what led me to that. And also realizing that it's pretty hard to get support for this out there, unfortunately. So it really drove me to want to be a sleep coach. So I think that's really what it was like
Yeah.
for me.
Thanks so much for sharing. I think one of the like most valuable things about like, people like us, like who went through this process, like sharing our stories, is that
Yeah.
our journeys, our stories are actually like they have like they're all different. Let's say your recovery lasted
Yeah.
like for 5 years. Mine was relatively short. But the recovery, like the process of actually working, like compared to the onset of insomnia for me was like, until I realized like, okay, this is anxiety driven, it was like fairly short. It was just a couple of months, but then the recovery took me over a year. So I would
Mhm.
say the value here is that when more people like who went through this experience and then talk about it,
Yeah.
they can give more kind of like more like people can relate to or find each story that they resonate with, because sometimes, and I totally understand that when a person who struggles for more years with insomnia, and then they let's say my story, which was like more on the shorter end, they might feel like, oh, it's not possible for me, like she had it so early, blah blah blah. And but then seeing that there are other people like who have like 5 years, then there are also, like, we know other coaches who had like 10, 15 or even 40 years of insomnia experience. That's, I think it's so valuable and reassuring to know that whatever the history with this situation is, there is the way out of this struggle, and finding this kind of like peace and effortless sleep. So I think this is really wonderful. So I was wondering, like, so today's topic, what I want to kind of like really dive into is generally recovery, in a sense, like understanding it, more setting like realistic expectations, because I know that probably if you would be in the beginning of your journey, your expectations about how your recovery would look like would be completely different than what actually happened when the recovery actually came. And for me it was exactly the same. So I just wanted to kind of maybe help maybe others to realize what we mean by recovery, because I feel like when we talk about something, each person can have like a different image in their minds, and thinking on that understanding that could like bring a lot of value. So and I was thinking, like, generally, like, how would you define recovery, like insomnia recovery?
Yeah, no pressure.
No pressure at all.
No pressure. I think of it as a time where you're no longer afraid of being awake at night. You're no longer afraid to experience anxiety and symptoms of hyperarousal in your body if you're having those. So that's how I think of it mostly. And I know we could go much more in detail with it, but if I think about it from a broad sense, it's no longer being afraid of the experience of insomnia.
Yeah,
it's a great way to think about it.
Exactly. I love this, because to me, like, insomnia is deeply ingrained with this like fear and fearful beliefs around sleep and our capacities to survive this. It's very much like very survival fear, like when we go through something like this. So I would say exactly, like, the recovery is no longer having any fear. I totally agree with that. And I love that you said not only like having no fear towards sleep, but also having no fear to experience anxiety and fear, because that's also the key. We cannot really be completely free from the struggle if we are still afraid to have a feeling of fear. And this is
that's exactly it. And I like how you made that distinction, because I did not say you never experience anxiety again, or you never have fear around anything, or around, it's not being afraid of having a moment of fear, not being anxious when you're anxious, and knowing that it's okay. So it's kind of a big difference.
It is. And I can imagine, like, for me, like, if I would think about myself, like back in the struggle, and I would hear something like, okay, recovery is about not fearing to experience fear. And I would freak out. I was like, what does it mean? I'm so afraid of these sensations. Like, what do you say? Like, to have no fear towards fear, like to experience this, like, how is this possible? But this is so paradoxical now. Is like basically the willingness to experience the fear is generally like the end of the fear. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like mind-breaking.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think everybody goes through that. Everybody's starting point is, including my own, is 100% resistance and fighting against every moment of the discomfort of insomnia, including every moment of anxiety, every moment of your body having a symptom, every moment you're awake and can't sleep, you're just in such full resistance to it. And so hearing this stuff can be like, well, what do you mean? How could I not be terrified of all this? Because it does feel like your life's on the line. It feels like your life is on the line every night and every single day. And so you are, as a human, really scared of everything that's happening. And which is really normal. But you're right, over time, you can start to, as you start to understand things differently and practice being with things differently, you can start to experience all of it in a different way. And, you can start to move towards, instead of all of that stuff being the biggest catastrophe ever, which is what it was for me every night and every day, just living a huge disaster. It was, oh, that's annoying.
Exactly. And I love that you said like that's annoying, because many people will think about this like, okay, so by me accepting fear and being okay with the fear, I need to like it. That's not really true. To be honest, like I exited the struggle and I still had preferences. I still had preferences towards like having peaceful night. If someone would give me a choice, okay, choose like today you are, you know, having like a, you know, whatever, 7-8 hours sleep, whatever it is, like the perfect standard. And then having like a sleepless night, of course I will go for, you know, the night with sleep. Then it makes so much sense. But there is no this tragedy, this kind of like drama around the other outcome. I don't know if it's like makes sense for anyone who is just starting, but this is how it feels right now for me. And I know that if I would hear something like this in the beginning, I would be like, hold on, I'm not, that's not what I'm signing up for. But eventually this is like, this inner peace is like gained through becoming utterly accepting of everything and knowing that you are going to be okay no matter what happens. And this is when the freedom arises, basically. And I really love the analogy that with this kind of fear, because for me, I love to think of it as some sort of like a program. You know, our brain runs a safety program, so it's like autopilot, right? It wants you to protect you from wakefulness by making you more awake, which is like super like paradoxical and illogical. And yet this is how, you know, if you would be afraid of something, let's say someone is chasing you, right? In this moment, you will never be able to fall asleep if there is a real threat, right? So when this threat is turned towards the sleep itself, then it kind of becomes this like self-fulfilling prophecy, or this kind of like vicious cycle where the object of the fear and object of desire is basically so tightly connected that but I was wondering, like, for you, when did you, because this is the thing, like sometimes I speak to people and they ask me something like this, that but you say that you know, the like for you recovery ended and how, like, what was it like, how did you know that it ended? If you know, if there is like complete peace with everything, when is the moment when you know, consider yourself recovered or whatever, you know? So I was wondering, like, what's your take on this?
Yeah, it's fuzzy. It's really fuzzy. I know everyone is like has a perception that there'll be like a day where it will become really clear, where you'll wake up that day maybe and just be like, this is the day, I feel it and it's here. But it's, for me, and I think for most people or all of us, it's really like a slow, gradual process. And when you're there, I always say it's really anticlimactic. It's really anticlimactic. You think what you think it's going to be is not. It's boring. It's really a neutral experience. You know, the balloons and confetti should fall from the sky, but no, not even a little bit. And there isn't even just even a feeling of like, oh, and now I'm fully, this is it. I think it's just so gradual. And I think it's you're more and more okay in several ways. You're more and more okay with everything that is actually happening that's uncomfortable, but you're also more and more okay when things are difficult. Like your ability to tap into a sense of well-being when things are uncomfortable, that gets bigger and bigger. But then also the discomfort itself over time gets smaller, right? You are sleeping more, you are having your hyperarousal start to go down. So it's just this really, really gradual easing into things. And so, yeah, I think for myself, when did I know? It wasn't one day. It was just over time, noticing the change in myself more than anything, I would say, and the change in my sleep and the change in my hyperarousal levels in my body and symptoms. And mostly noticing like, oh, I don't really feel afraid anymore. I would, just like what you said, still have my strong preferences. I have preferences that I would rather have a really good night and sleep and feel great and all the things. But I know that I'm okay either way. And that's when I started to feel, I think, oh, I'm recovered, when I really felt like I know I'm okay either way. So it wasn't like I hit perfect sleep and that was it. And
Yeah.
it wasn't
There was
really
no
like,
like this moment, like
no moment, no
yeah.
moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, when what you're describing is exactly my experience as well. It was so, it's like, it's really, it was boring. It was
So
uneventful. It was
boring.
like really like unimpressing, like and
Yeah.
unimpressive
Yeah.
completely. And I would say that this is nothing what I expected. For
Yep.
me, it was more like losing interest in solving it any further because I was realizing that even my wins, they were fleeting, just like my speed bumps,
Sure.
they were fleeting. So I was kind
Yeah.
of feeling like this kind of like weird sense of like, okay, things are not like, terrible because I can, I can live with this, right? And at the same time, I know if there is like going like a smooth a patch of like better sleep, I'm not attached to that either. So
Mm-hmm.
it was like such a this like balanced was the right word, like equanimity, feeling that like good and bad, it stopped having like its
Yeah.
meaning to me. It's to me is like, I mean, there were preferences, right? But there was no emotional attachment to, there was no celebration when it was like a good night. There was no misery and despair when
Yeah.
it was not so great. So for me, like it was ending more on this kind of like sad note, but I was realizing like there is nothing I can do. I tried, like really, I really tried. So I was kind of exhausted myself, like my mind exhausted itself. That's why I would call it. And then even if there was hyper arousal, it was just it started feeling like every speed bump had the same qualities. It was always feeling it felt always like it is always something new, like the brain comes up with some new let's say manifestation of like sleeplessness or like hyper
Mm-hmm.
arousal.
Yeah.
Then it was always felt like invitation to think of it as the worst,
Oh,
or
that's
like
always
never
an
ending.
invitation that's there, isn't it? Like, wait a
Exactly.
minute. Yeah.
And I started noticing these patterns. It just noticed like every single time I get into a speed bump, this is how I think, this is how I
Yeah.
perceive stuff. So I was started noticing like the patterns. So I was like more like in a meta cognition there rather than
Yeah.
like really inside
Yeah.
of the speed bump. And I was just like, on one hand, like there was hyperarousal going on. I was like, there were
Sure.
heart palpitations, there were, like racing thoughts, but there was also kind of like, what can I do? Like, the mindset at the time was like, this sucks, but whatever. Like, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, losing interest in this topic. That was kind of like for me, very gradual, very slow, uneventful actually.
Yeah. Do you find it's it's like the absence of certain things too? Like, for example, it's the absence of constantly asking certain questions to yourself. Like, will I ever recover?
Yeah,
Will, like things like that. Because when you're in it, and
exactly.
even when you're starting off any sort of recovery process, you're constantly asking yourself, but what if I'm uniquely severe and this doesn't work for me? Or what if I never recover? Or what if this? Or what if, again,
Yeah,
like all these, like we have a lot of what's normal.
yeah,
I think everybody enters into it and has a lot of what ifs. And at some point at later stages, you just don't ask those questions as much or
yeah,
anymore at all at some point. And they just sort of fall away. It's not because you even feel like this intense certainty about anything, or
mm-hmm.
maybe you do for some of them, but it's as the fear goes away. I think one way to maybe describe what I mean by
Mm-hmm.
this is one of the things I would ask myself is, what if I never recover? What if this comes back constantly through my life
Yep.
or something like that? And I think that's a common fear. Like, what if this
Yo,
just
I had it.
constantly
Exactly. That was like
comes
up
back?
until like, yeah, like this thought was there. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But then as I went through my own process, I realized it's not that I couldn't have certain experiences around sleep disruption, anxiety, hyperarousal, all these things. Sure, we're all going to go through various life experiences, but that I could never really go through insomnia again, because so much of insomnia for me, and I think for so many people, is we're lost in that confusion. We don't understand what's going on. There's so much fear of the fear. And once you really go through a process with yourself and unwind a lot of that, it's like, you know, too much, you've seen too much. You're not going back. You're really not. So I know it's impossible for me to go back to the experience that I had before as somebody, like as the insomniac. Like I just know that it's really impossible. And that was a gradual realization as well as I was recovering. It's like, well, but I'm a different person now. I have new understanding. I have grown capacity within myself for this experience. And so I could never have that I could never go back, essentially.
Yeah. I would
right?
say,
I'm not immune from anxiety. That's not what I'm saying. Right. But I could never go back there again. So the fear of going back there again was gone because it no longer made sense that I could go back. Yeah.
I think there was no more this collective perception of insomnia as some sort of a monster, like just like this blurry, dark cloud of whatever happening there, because everything has been seen there. Because like for me, like each night was like what's the right word, like decomposed, like, or like I broke it down. I broke down every fear. I looked under every single stone that there was, and I saw that there is nothing. There was just like, as bad as it can get, it's basically me experiencing all-nighter, and I've been experiencing them throughout my recovery all the time. Even if in the future an all-nighter happens, then it's just what it's gonna happen. Like that's meant to be, and I have no kind of like hard feelings about that. And if there is anxiety, then there is anxiety. So exactly as you said, there's like nothing can surprise you anymore in this sense. Like there's just like nothing in there. So I totally understand that. And then coming back to this like questions like, what if I never recover? What if like this, I will like stay like this forever, and so on and so on. For me, it was interesting that I had like, as I was saying, that I started noticing the patterns, how my brain behaves during speed bumps. This is what I started noticing with this kind of what if thoughts. So basically, every time I had this what if thoughts, before I would instantly get into the story of that what if thought. So let's say my brain says like, okay, what if you it will be a fourth night in a row and you have zero sleep, right? And then I would start imagining and so on. I would get into the story, and I would get all like really worked up about that, and I would get scared, and then I would do something based on that fear, right? But then it was something like more like a recognition of that, okay, this is like what if thought. It's exactly what if thought that I had in the beginning. The mechanism of that thought did not change. It's literally the same mechanism that wants to show you the worst picture that is possible, that the mind can possibly conjure, and then just in hopes to make you act. So I was like seeing the trick, and my kind of like response to them was fading. It was more like, yeah, whatever, and then the thought with where the brain was telling me like, okay, what if you will keep having those, like, what if you will never recover, and you will always will have speed bumps, like this kind of like worsenings for the rest of your life. And then I realized like, okay, like if you look at this as some sort of like a concept, like just like life of suffering and blah blah blah, the story, of course it feels like like scary or something. But if you break it down, what is that? What is, like, let's say this worsening? I have gone through this, so if it happens, I'm gonna be okay. I will survive this, whatever. It can happen. It can happen in 10 years, in 20 years, whatever. So I was kind of like more accepting, like, even of the future possibility of the fear arising or sleeplessness arising. And that was kind of basically one of the final kind of fears that broke down, because I don't have to be afraid of future of speed bumps happening, because A, I'm going to survive them, and B, is that they cease to exist. They seem to cease to exist or arise when you're not afraid of them. Because exactly like the speed bump, especially the last ones, like the final kind of like many people get into this state of this kind of plateau where it's like it's not moving anywhere. It's because there is still the fear of that dive.
Yeah. Holding
Exactly.
on to the good, grasping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't know. For me, recovery is like never experiencing speed bumps. Well, that's not recovery, because that means that if you set for yourself like a goal, like, okay, my goal is to never experience a speed bump, that means that you somehow, for that goal to be achieved, we need to somehow get control over our sleep, which we
Yeah.
cannot by
Yeah,
default.
it's almost like saying I need to make sure I'm never going to experience anxiety. I need to make
Exactly.
sure I'm never going to experience um a symptom in my body that can indicate hyperarousal. I need to make sure I'm never going to experience these things again, right? And it's
Yeah.
just we're all human. We're all going to experience this stuff. It's just that we can no longer experience in the same, what I want to call like constant chronic sort of way, but
Exactly.
there is no complete elimination of these
Yeah.
kinds of experiences because they're just part of normal human life.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And here's the thing, even like many people feel like um the obstacle on their recovery is anxiety itself, and that's not an
Yes.
obstacle at all. Here's the thing, like
Mhm.
I had so much anxiety before I developed insomnia, and yet it
Yeah,
didn't
me
stand in
too.
the way of sleep. So it was like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense. I can experience anxiety in the future. So, and it's still, even if that anxiety is somehow connected to, let's say, sleep or something, that still doesn't guarantees that my night is going to be terrible.
No.
Things are not as connected as I thought they were.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like really relieving, like realization. But I think that when we talk about this kind of like, yeah, like being like ready, that yeah, like if something like, let's say, sleeplessness happens in the future, or like a speed bump happens in the future, it's going to be all right. I can easily imagine for someone who is in the struggle are going to be kind of scared by that. It's like, what
Hmm.
do you mean? Like, so that means that you are not recovered, like, oh, like,
Yeah.
so for me, recovery is like never, having to experience like sleeplessness ever again. And I was just like thinking like how to, because this is like really like the place on one hand, like, yeah, we can perceive it as something like a very pessimistic like message in terms of like, yeah,
Yeah.
there is nothing you can do, and like to force yourself to sleep. And if sleeplessness happens, then it's something that happens, right? So we are better off like when we embrace it rather than fight with it, right?
Yeah.
But then thinking like, for me, like that realization also brought a huge amount of relief. And this is what I
Hmm.
value a lot. I was like, this is where the freedom also was like found for me, because
Yeah.
just like let's say, like, just like there is this realization, okay, there is nothing I can do, which is like, okay, it's like really sad moment realization. There's also the kind of like the flip side of it is that there's nothing is required of me. There's
Right.
nothing like I have to do anymore. Like there's no longer requirements for me. I can be free to
Hmm.
respond,
Yeah.
to react, to think, to feel however I want. So this is something that is like really interesting, I think, like to realize that it's not just comes with this, there's nothing you can do, but there's also like there is nothing needed to be done, if that
Right.
makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it does make sense. And
Yeah.
to me, it also felt like you know, the growing capacity within myself, almost like what you're talking about with the what if thoughts, right? I had that same experience. I have so many of those what ifs. Wait a minute. I'm going down that rabbit hole storyline every single
Yep.
time. I believe all of my negative thinking. And going through a process with myself to understand that more, to start to shift my own relationship with my mind, all of
Yes.
that, you are changing how you're relating to all these things, and you are growing capacity within yourself. And to me, I don't know if you also had this experience, that was a large part of why I didn't feel afraid anymore of things.
Mhm.
And the idea of I'll use the example of panic attacks, because I used to have
Mhm.
various levels of panic attacks throughout the night, throughout the day, just hated them, awful. And I have not had a panic attack since I recovered from insomnia. But does that mean that I never will again? No, I could, but I do not feel okay about panic attacks because I'm assuming I will never have one ever again. I feel really okay and willing to have them because I know I can handle having
Yep.
one.
Exactly.
And for me, that was the freedom part of things. It was not the assumption that, okay, I'll never experience any of this flavor of discomfort again. It's that I know I can be with this discomfort. And
Yeah.
so therefore I'm willing to experience it. I'm not afraid. It's okay. And then of course,
Yeah.
like you were saying, the irony is it's less likely to show up if
Yep.
you're in that
Exactly.
space with it. But I do think, people can get really afraid if let's say they've gone a stretch of time, their sleep is really good. They're not experiencing anxiety. And then all of a sudden they have a life event, they have something happen and they feel anxious again.
Yep.
And their sleep is disrupted again and they get
Yep.
afraid again. And
Yeah.
they had an expectation that they would never feel, anxiety maybe around that issue, or they would never have disrupted sleep. And
Yeah.
it can be very scary around
No,
that.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I think this is why this like education around like what are the proper expectations of this process is not like the point of recovery is not to make sure you never experience, hyperarousal or like wakefulness at night, is knowing that you're going to be okay regardless of it. And interesting part is like the byproduct of that, of okayness, is actually you being able to live your life however you want, and that not being actually like not affecting your sleep even that much. Like seriously, like I'm still open to experience whatever happens, like whatever night there is going to be, but it doesn't happen. That's the thing. It's like I go on a trip, or I sleep in very uncomfortable conditions in different places, or I can drink coffee at whatever 7 p.m. or something. It's like there is no fear. There is no this mechanism that like starts to protect me and protect my sleep. So this is like the benefits or the byproduct of that, of not being afraid of experiencing that.
Yeah. And you talking about living life again, I think that's also a really big sign of kind of those later parts of recovery as well. Like how we were saying, it's anticlimactic and it's kind of neutral and boring, guys. But I think another like clue is that you're living life more and more.
Exactly.
And I know there are definitely people that that never pulled away from life. But myself, I know many others, we really did. I really pulled away from life in a big way. And so, at some point it was just, I'm looking around at how much life has changed and how much I am living life more. And even that happens, it was slowly, it was not overnight. So even that, it kind of creeps up on you in a positive way. Like, when did that happen? When did I start socializing in the evening again? I know you remember, but here I am. And you just start looking around and seeing that you are living your life again. And you're saying yes to things that normally would have been just no's, just straight no's, things you would never consider doing, like going to the wedding that you were invited to or whatever. Like you're now finding ways to say yes, even if you have a moment of, oh, I haven't done that in a while. Oh, I don't know. Like you might have that.
Yeah.
You're human, but then you end up saying yes to a lot of things because you realize you want to do those things. They're important to you. And so you say yes. Whereas during my insomnia years, I said no to so many things, didn't matter if they were important to me or not, because I felt they were critical to my survival. So I think that's another element of what recovery looks like, is you are looking around and noticing you're living your life more, you're saying yes to more things, you're letting your values of what you value, what you want for yourself, take more of the lead, even in moments where that feels kind of scary. You're starting to do that more. And I don't think that happens all at once. I do think that's also a process to go through, especially if you were like me and you shut everything down for a period of time, right? But that, as you were speaking of that and living life more, I thought that's another really big way that I would define recovery, is moving back into life and really looking at and following what is meaningful, what feels like something you want to move towards, and you're starting to do that, even if it's in the smallest ways.
Yep.
You're starting to do that.
No, it's like, it's totally like, it's very accurate what you're saying, because for me that's exactly as like it felt like this at the end, is like, as my interest in solving sleep issue was kind of like fading, I was
Yeah.
like, it was not like really sleep-wise was not changing. It was more like there were good nights, there were bad nights, and it was just kind of all kind of like, started having like the feeling of like, it's all the same. I'm not interested in kind of like, you know,
Yeah.
watching
Get
every up and
bored with
down.
it. That's great advice. Get so bored with it,
Yeah,
guys.
yeah, exactly.
Get
So,
bored. Yeah.
yeah, so this kind of like losing like interest in this, like automatically, as this interest in sleep topic was fading, the interest in life was starting to expand.
Yeah.
And exactly as you said, it was not instant. It was not like 100% engagement in your
No.
life. For a very like quite a while, it still felt like there is somewhere on the background like the fresh memory of this, and there's still this kind of like the smell of insomnia or whatever, like thinking of this pattern, like there's like, and
Totally.
usually like that's what sometimes people like ask, and they say that to them life doesn't seem the same anymore. Even if they are doing better, they still feel there is somewhere like this topic on the, on the radar.
Looming in the
Yes,
darkness,
looming,
waiting
exactly.
to come
Exactly, somewhere
back.
like this on the background, so that whatever they do, like, they do stuff that they used to enjoy, it kind of like fades the intensity of that joy. And I wonder, like, when you hear this kind of like, um, question, like, how do you usually like, approach this or describe it?
Yeah. To me, that sounds a lot like being somewhere in the middle, maybe not feeling fully recovered yet. You're somewhere in those middle
Mhm.
stages where you are living life more, you're probably sleeping more and feeling better and all the things, which is amazing. But it's still looming, and there's still a
Yeah.
lot of fear of like, but what if this pounces, and what if this comes back, and what if this, and what if, so there's probably a lot of what ifs
Yeah.
still, and maybe even a believing of those, the what if questions that the mind is asking, and which is again normal for, I would say, like middle stages of recovery, to still have
Mhm.
that fear of this thing is there and it can come back at any moment and ruin my life, and all of those
Yeah.
things. And then there's another part of this that it makes me think of as well. So that's part of it, is I think
Mhm.
that's just mid stage, and
Mhm.
it's okay and
Yeah.
normal. And at some point you will be living your life and
Mhm.
you will not feel like this thing is in the dark waiting to pounce. You will not.
Exactly.
So no, you will not have to live that way for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
There is absolute, freedom from that, because that's part of the fear,
Yeah.
right? That's part of the fear, and that's okay. Um, and I don't know if this is related a little bit. Well, maybe you can let me know what you think, but it's a little different. But sometimes what I see happen with people, and with myself as well, is once you do feel like, okay, I'm pretty much recovered. Again, you look around and life is pretty different and you're not really afraid anymore. But you might notice that you either feel kind of flat
Mhm.
a little bit emotionally. Maybe you're doing things that it's like, I used to really feel like a certain amount of
Mhm.
joy with this, and how come I'm not feeling that exact same way? Or there's an expectation that the moment you recover, you will feel elated, or you will
Yeah.
feel certain really elevated emotions, because you've just been through this really hard thing, that the story is, this is ruining my life, this is why I feel horrible, all of that, right? And there's of course elements of truth to that. And it's like, once this is gone, I will just feel amazing. Right. And like we were saying, how anticlimactic and neutral and boring
Yep.
that like recovery sneaks up on you a little bit. You're like, oh, I'm kind of here.
Yeah.
And it's not replaced by a lot of really elevated feelings. It's
Yeah.
more replaced by just neutrality in
Mhm.
general.
Yep.
And in addition, I found with myself that I had just come from years where the predominant emotion was, at times depression, at times, really high levels of agitation and anxiety, hopelessness, grief, all the things. And to expect to just, I'm going to snap into being like this joyful, happy person immediately when I feel recovered, I don't think it really goes that way. That too is a bit of a process.
Yeah.
of coming back to certain emotional states, if that makes sense. And for me, part of that was being willing to feel and process a lot of the pain during my recovery process, which sounds counterintuitive a little bit, but if we're, let's say, repressing a lot of pain, or we're not willing to experience it, we're really limiting our overall emotional capacity, or our whole bandwidth so much, right?
Exactly.
And so for me, part of my healing process was I had to feel a lot of pain and go through a lot of what was there. And then that opened up the ability to feel other more quote unquote positive. I hate saying negative and positive emotions, but people will know what I mean by
I
that.
totally get that. Yeah.
People will know. And then also, I think giving that a little bit of time, and even doing things a little bit on purpose was helpful for me. Doing things that I knew, okay, this does make me happy. I might not feel it right now, but I might have a little glimmer moment where you feel a little bit of something, and then that can grow, and working with it. Because I think there can be a little bit of a expectation that once somebody's recovered, there's going to be a lot of emotional elevation, or maybe right back to where they were. And it's going to feel a certain way. And that doesn't always happen because it is so much more neutral. But then also, if you've spent a lot of time in certain emotional states or repressing emotional pain, there can be a little bit of work to be done there so that you can kind of come back into a broader emotional spectrum, if that does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense, because for me, it wasn't like, I would say it was not felt strongly as depression, but for me, the ending was like, there was a lot of sadness. Exactly as you said, like my expectations were there, like my recovery is basically solution to all my life's problems. Like, that there should be, because for me, for a very long time, for many months, I thought that my misery was because I was sleeping poorly. And now I'm realizing I'm getting what I actually like, sleep is coming back. Where's the prize that I was like,
where's
promised?
my prize?
And there is no, like, there is not such thing, because we realize that, sleep is not the answer to everything. Of course, it's one of the fundamental functions of the body. We don't kind of deny that. We don't like say like, oh, it's not important. Of course it is. But that's the thing, like, by having like, great sleep, it doesn't mean that we will be always super productive. We will always be super optimistic and positive, because, like, life happens, and, all sorts of things happen. So I would say that when we start to kind of like coming out of it, and we can find, like, we can face this reality that, like, sleep was not actually the answer to all my life's problems, because there is life to be lived, right? So and this is, I feel like there is like a normal, like, kind of like a buffer period. It's like when you're like one leg is here and one leg is there, so it's like, you're basically in both worlds. And this moment, as you said, it needs to be lived. It needs to be kind of like experienced and allowed. Because for me, it's like, if I would start fighting and questioning, why is it that I'm feeling sad? I was not supposed to be sad. Then I would be just like keeping like this problem solving mechanism going. And then I would feel more agitated about feeling sad. Right. So then I'm back into the struggle. But then I realized, you know what, if there is sadness, then there is sadness. There's nothing I can do about it. And for me, it's actually much more energy. What is it? This economic, or how's like energy saving to just like allow myself to feel sad and just like leave it fully. And this is when I started noticing that as I was allowing myself to experience this kind of like mood at the end of the struggle, I started noticing that without the resistance to this feeling, I started noticing like that suddenly other stuff like started having like their lure or whatever. Like I started being more interested in the rest of the life, in other areas of life. And this is how I slowly started coming out of this kind of like mini depression period, when the sleep topic was no longer relevant for me, but then life was like getting more and more interesting, because I realized like, okay, there is like not much for me to do in sleep world. I mean, like I tried, and it seems like every time I feel like I got it, I don't get it. So I was like, I will just let, the night decide whatever it wants to be. And there was this gradual entrance or reintroduction of normal life.
Yes.
So this is like that's exactly how it was for me. Exactly, like super boring. But yeah, it gets to the place where you no longer have any sort of relationship with this issue. There is still memory, right? Because many people
Yes.
feel like I need to forget about insomnia. Like I cannot imagine like myself still remembering the struggle and not experiencing the burden of it. But here's the thing, you can still have memories. I can like remember some moments, but I can revisit it freely without being afraid of that impacting, because it's just a memory. It doesn't have anymore the emotional
Charge.
attachment, the emotional charge. Exactly. So I think this is also one of the true kind of like one of the experience like as the recovery goes. And do you find it's actually like that the word recovery does not really work exactly what we are talking about there? Like, do you feel
Sometimes, but I can't think of a better word at
me
the
neither.
same time. So part of it, I do think it fits well, but I know what you mean. I think at some point we might describe it in a different way. Sometimes I use the word like overcoming.
Yeah.
Can be a word. One of the clients that I work with sometimes uses the word evolving, which is
Evolving.
interesting.
Oh, that's so nice.
Evolving, and I like that
Evolving.
one too. But you're right. I think at the time the word recovery made a lot of sense to me, because I just really felt like that's what was like, I was trying to recover from this really dark, hard period. But
Yeah.
I think I know what you mean as a coach now. It's like, what are other ways to describe this?
Yeah, there's no other way, because for me, like, to be honest, I don't like, I talk about it in the context of, describing the journey and, explaining the nuances. But personally, to me, there's no interest in like labeling whatever the state that I'm in as recovery. There is no state like, oh, I'm recovered and there is identity. There is no identity actually with this. Like,
Yeah,
there's
you
no,
shed the insomniac identity, which was once so strong, right? I used to self-identify as an insomniac. Everybody around me identified me that way. So it's more the absence of that
exactly.
than something new coming in. It's just the absence of that, I would say. Yeah, completely.
I like the shedding like aspect, because that's exactly what it is. And you mentioned like you're working with clients, and I was wondering, like, when person, like, you briefly touched this kind of questions, but I wonder, like, when someone asks you a question like about the duration, or like about the timeline, in a sense that, okay, why is it that, what impacts the duration of recovery, and why some people take longer time to recover, some people it happens shorter? Because I never could figure out like the actual answer. I don't really have like clear answer on that, but I wonder if you have anything on that.
I have all the answers here today.
Nice.
No, yeah. So I think really two questions, like how long does it take? Because everybody wants to know that. And then like what could make a recovery go faster or slower? I do have some thoughts around that. The first is, how long does it take? It takes as long as it takes. I know that's the most annoying answer. There is no timeline. But one thing I hear a lot, so let's dispel, I guess, a myth around this, because I hear from a lot of people pretty consistently this perception that it should take ballpark 1 to 3 months. I hear that a lot. And if it's taking longer than that, it's a bad sign. Why am I I hear that so commonly. And I think it's so important to normalize longer recovery periods, because I do think that's more the norm. And, Coach Beth and I were talking about this recently as well. We both have longer recovery periods, and, that was really normal for us. And when I talk about mine's also weird. And I always say it's really fuzzy, because depending on how you look at mine, it either took me around 8 months or it took me a year and 8 months. And that's because I had this whole year before what I consider my quote unquote formal recovery, a whole year where before I understood what was happening, before I had stumbled on, Daniel and other resources that ultimately helped me. I had hit a point after probably about 4 years of such intense, desperate struggle that I came to a place of greater surrender from a place of desperation. I really hit that hard with myself. And there was a gift in that, in the sense that I stopped fighting quite as hard. I started accepting more. I just didn't have as much fight in me anymore.
Yeah.
I was like,
So
I'm
so
getting tired.
this was before you discovered basically the sleep coach school and Daniel's teachings,
All
right?
of it. Yes. So this is just after about maybe years of going down every rabbit hole, you know, all the doctors, all the physical stuff, all the chasing all the symptoms, all the things. And part of it was I ran out of things to look into, right? I had already gone to all the specialists and all the things and been told you're fine, you know, no, it's not this. And so part of it was I didn't know where else to go. I felt like I had exhausted my resources in that sense. And also my energy resources were really depleted. And I started to view my insomnia more I started to view it as, okay, this isn't the rest of my life. This will always be my life. How do I now create some semblance of a life within this? And I came to that place, and that did shift things for me. I still didn't understand what was going on. I was still really afraid, all of it. And so that's why I say it wasn't part of my formal recovery process, because I still had no understanding. I just was saying, I don't have the energy to fight so hard anymore. How do I live my life? And there was surrender in that. There was dropping some of the fight, not all of it, but some of it. And my sleep did improve. Things did improve that year, mentally, emotionally, physically. I didn't understand why. And that's why I had called that the truce. I felt like I had this truce with my insomnia. I was still feeding it a lot of things in terms of routines and but it felt like things had eased a little bit. And I didn't understand that it was because I was fighting less. And then when I stumbled on Daniel, and which led me to other helpful resources too, and I understood what was going on. And that's when I think of, okay, that's when I really started what I think of as my recovery process. From that point on, it was, at least 6 to 8 months before I really started to see, a change in my hyperarousal going down, my sleep consistency, my own capacity, all of that kind of stuff. So that's why it's so fuzzy. So how long does it take? For me, I don't know, again, 6 to 8 months or a year and 6 to 8 months, depending on how you view that, because that whole year really did, I think, also prepare me mentally and emotionally to be really receptive to this approach, to step into this approach quite quickly, all of that. So I always like to credit it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But there's also like the like first like 4 years or something, there was also probably something was going on, like at least some sort of experiencing and facing, and even if it was not fully perceived that way.
I think the first almost 4 years was just me fighting as hard as I could.
Yeah. But maybe this is the part of this, like exhausting the problem
I
solving.
think that's why I hit that point. It wasn't from greater understanding. It was from pure desperate exhaustion of I cannot fight this hard anymore. I do not have it in me anymore. That's where it came from. And, I always talk about we can choose surrender actively, or we can come to it kind of more on our knees. And I came to it on my knees. And looking back would have been better. It would have been easier to choose it, but that's how I got there in the beginning. And during my more formal recovery process, I was actively choosing it, which was quite different. So that was my timeline, but that was just my timeline. And for those listening, don't take it on. It's not yours. It's okay. So some people will hear that and they'll be comforted that it wasn't 1 to 3 months, and others might feel afraid. But that's why I say, don't take it on, right? Everybody has their own process, their own timeline, and some people will recover more quickly than others. And that's okay. That's completely, what was yours like? I know yours was about a year.
It was like long. In reverse, I would say, because for you, say 5 years. And I would say those first 4 years, they were valuable in itself, because you were exhausting that problem solving, but because for me,
I had so much problem solving in me that it needed to be beaten out over years and years of struggle. Yes, correct.
Yeah, but because I started, like, for me, like this place of like not understanding what is going on there, that was like lasting like for a couple of months. So it was not like what I would expect, that okay, during a couple of months, like there's not much fear that can be built like from that. Yet the moment when I started realizing, oh my God, this is anxiety playing tricks, and this is my anxiety that creates all these crazy experiences, which is like difficult to even comprehend. Still, it took me more than a year from understanding, because I haven't exhausted that reservoir of still like the brain holding some hope, like, oh, maybe there is a magic, trick you can do this. So I would say, like, for you, you kind of did this like very hidden, like kind of like very this under the radar kind of work, which was like helpful to come to this place, which felt like, okay, you're on your knees, basically. There is no other choice but to surrender, which is basically where we kind of come in like towards when we talk about acceptance, right? But when it happens, as there's the only possibility there. So that's also like, that's how like that's how it eventually happens. So for me, it was also like, even with the knowledge, everything, like I understand like what is going on, my brain was still resisting. My brain somewhere, it still had its capacity to problem solve. It needed to look into every possible avenue just to make sure that this is not it. So it was more like, the brain had like maybe more kind of ideas how to solve it, and it always was drawn to try this and try that and so on and so on, and creating like this sleep efforts on the way. And then every time it saw like, okay, this is not the answer, this is not the answer, this is not the answer, eventually it kind of like it runs out of ideas. And this is the place exactly. I feel like when person feels kind of like angry, like really like pissed off, like, I hate this. Like, to me, it's like, okay, you're very close, like you're really really close, like, because it feels like the worst, because it's like there is no other way for me to solve this. And usually this is when like the surrendering, like very near, like this kind of like
I agree. I do think that we all have to go through our own process of problem solving this and going through different routes and whatever it might be. And we all have a different amount of that we have to do, that we feel we need to do. I had quite a bit of it. And you're right. By the time I discovered this different way of approaching insomnia and understanding it from the anxiety perspective, I was very receptive to that because I had already done all of everything else before that and gone through the other type of surrender for the, like, so I was really, I want to say primed, or I was very open to that. And it resonated pretty quickly with me. And I already knew, well, I don't need to keep doing all this other stuff. I already did all that stuff. But I often wonder, what if I had stumbled on this view of insomnia much earlier? Because sometimes people say that, right? A lot. Oh gosh, I wish I had found you guys years before. I wish I had, and I have thought that too. Oh, I wish I had stumbled on this in year one. But I don't know if I would have been open to it. I don't know, because I think I still would have had to go through my own turning over of rocks, so to speak, to investigate and all the things. So you never know, but that also plays a role in different lengths of recovery time as well for people. But so that's a really long way of saying there is no one kind of average recovery time, really, that people are different. There's no timeline you can place on any kind of healing that you're doing. It just doesn't really exist. And maybe we can talk a little bit about what we've seen through working with people that maybe can help, like the stuff that does help build momentum and maybe make recovery a little bit easier, a little bit faster, versus stuff that, might slow it down a little bit.
Definitely. That's a really good idea. Before we do that, actually, I forgot, like I wanted to mention like that you recently launched your website.
Right.
And yes, and I just want to anyone like to know that you can reach out to Coach Michelle and see like if you're interested in one-on-one offer. So just feel free to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I did. So I recently launched my coaching business. So you can find me at hopefulmind.com anytime. Even if you
I
need
will
help.
provide all the links in the in the description to the video so people can
Yeah.
find you. But I'm really excited about that. I know that you've been working on it for a long time, but
Way too long. Yes.
perfectionism. That's what it's called.
Horrible. Yes, that's part of it. That's part of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Anxiety in that area of my life.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. For
Cool.
sure.
So yeah. Yeah. So now basically we can talk about this, like the things that kind of
Yeah.
like, probably like stand in the way and things are like kind of helping. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. One thought that comes to mind is how people are choosing to define progress as they're in their own recovery journey with themselves. And it's so tempting to define progress as how many hours of sleep am I getting every single night or over a week, whatever the scale is. Just what does my sleep look like? What does
Yep.
my hyperarousal look like? That is the most logical, rational way to think about progress. So, of course, I think that's what most of us do, but it's not actually helpful, especially in the beginning as
Yeah.
you're working through this stuff, because it keeps people really focused on those markers and they are not going to shift and move at the beginning.
Yep.
We talk about this time lag. It's all of this kind of work, this kind of internal work that you're doing with yourself, working with, the thoughts, the feelings, the physical symptoms, behaviors that you're doing, all of it. It often doesn't really create this change in the moment. Right. And that's what we want. We want to do the thing and then we want the reward.
Yeah. Instant.
I do the instant, right? I want to do this. Okay. I'm accepting this, but I didn't sleep tonight, but I want my reward of sleep. And that makes sense because you're a human being.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work that way. And, I know for my own recovery process, it was doing the work and taking months to see sort of change in sleep, in hyperarousal symptoms. So there is this time lag. The time lag's different for everybody. It's not, a set thing, but the more we are doing something and like checking, right? Okay, I just did this. I just did I just accepted these things, or I just worked with my thoughts differently, or I felt a feeling, whatever it might be. And then you're checking, is it still there? Is it still there? Is it still there?
Yeah.
That kind of thing, right? Or I'm going out and I'm living my life. I saw friends, but then you're like, okay, wait, how am I going to sleep tonight? How does that going to, there's that constant checking of I did the thing. And now where's the reward of sleep, or where's the reward of this symptom, this anxiety symptom going away?
Exactly.
And there's this push pull of, even when you know it doesn't happen that way, it's still a very hard thing to not have that expectation and to be in the recovery process in that sort of way and then if that's not changing, like if I did the thing and this did not change, I am failing.
Yep.
Right. I'm not moving forward. I'm not seeing progress. And then that is, that obviously feels very difficult. And so that's one thing is that's the first thing that comes to mind is how the way people define progress is so important. And if it's defining progress according to hours of sleep and symptoms, then I think that can keep people stuck for longer, essentially, until they start to see that cycle a little bit and start to detach themselves from that and instead really start to focus on progress being the work they are doing, right? How are they perceiving things? How are they mentally, emotionally responding to what's showing up? Are they starting to move towards their own values and living their life? All these kinds of things, like the work, so to speak, like, are they, right? Are they looking at that as that's the progress, the change they're seeing in themselves? And that is hard to do.
Yeah.
But I find an important one. for sure.
Something that comes to my mind, because this exactly, you're like very spot on this, the definition of the progress, because oftentimes we set for ourselves goals that are beyond our control. Right.
Yes. Yes.
So things like whenever we set a goal for ourselves, something that we cannot control how we sleep, how deep we sleep, because sometimes people might be concerned not only about the duration of sleep, but also how deep it is, right? Because some people can feel like, oh, I'm having this light sleep and I'm not happy with it, and therefore I need to do something so that I get deeper sleep. So they kind of get stuck on this metric of how deep their sleep is, or let's say how many awakenings they have. So anything that implies, having a control over sleep or our emotions, which we don't have, it's usually very unhelpful, because then it's kind of like you're punishing yourself. Like when you see not achieving this goal, then you kind of punish yourself. You start like to dig in, like where's the problem in yourself, when in reality there's no problem. You just don't have that level of control over these things. The sleep and emotions, like the anxiety, they're more, to me, they're like byproducts, they're side effects of some more fundamental changes. And this fundamental change is something that what you said, that this is where it's helpful to really look into and work towards that, like changing our perceptions with wakefulness, changing our perception with our own emotions and even thoughts, not seeing thoughts as the enemy to recovery, but just seeing that, this is like a bunch of stuff that our brain comes up with when it's scared, especially. So I'm treating them as just a bunch of stuff, like not really that important. It's just automatic. And this is the work where we can find some sort of like see the change. So I get like really excited when a person like notices that when they might not like say like, oh, I don't really see like huge improvement sleep wise, but I'm seeing so much more, such a huge change in how I'm responding to this. And this is much greater, like a more beneficial measurement of, how you're moving forward. Because exactly like you said, like you've been like doing this kind of like internal work for a long time, until you started seeing the effect of it, the side effect of that, right, in terms of sleep and then how you feel. So there was this kind of like delay in that. And I feel it's like very helpful to acknowledge, because they're like usually people expect this kind of like very quick start. And I noticed, actually, this is what I wanted to talk about, that some people, they have like different like dynamic of the recovery process. I noticed that there are people who have like very slow start. So they start learning about like how this whole paradox works, what things impact it, like how anxiety works, just fundamental principles of acceptance and self-kindness. And it makes sense to them, right? So they kind of like start like really working on that change of perception, but then they don't see the outcome in terms of sleep. So, and they might be in this stage for quite a long time, right? It's like, and then they were like, they might be, sometimes questioning, like, why am I like, my sleep is not getting different. My experiences changes, and like, with the night, but the sleep wise, I'm still kind of like having the same experience over and over. And then somewhere, like sometimes it could be like several months of that inner work, and something flips and it just goes smooth, like sleep goes like nicely. And then there's other people who have like the opposite, like they usually have like a very quick start. When they just like read about something, everything is like great, sleep is great, no anxiety, they get super excited. And then and what happens then they start experiencing their first speed bumps, and that's where a lot of frustration. So it's more like, for someone who's been building their way there like very slowly, the setbacks are perceived less dramatically as for someone who had like a very positive quick start, and then like experience their first speed bumps. But I wonder, like, what, like, have you experienced like this type of journeys?
Yeah, definitely. The people that have the immediate like relief in it, I call that the honeymoon phase. Like they're honeymooning kind of a little bit. They're in a honeymoon phase. And oftentimes I see that a lot. They'll stumble on, let's say it's the channel or any information, and they understand it, and the relief of that. The relief is so immense that they let go. It's like, oh my gosh, right? And they will have this immediate impact from that. And then they move into this speed bump territory of things. And I do think that can be really hard. I did not have the honeymoon period. I feel like I had a moment of immense mental relief knowing what was going on, but it didn't translate into my sleep or hyperarousal at all. I hadn't at all. But I do see that commonly. Did you have a honeymoon period where at the very beginning you were just like, and everything was great. And you were like, that's it. I'm here. I'm here now.
No, actually, this is interesting. I had this moment in the beginning when I started realizing what is going on. It brought me a tremendous release of pressure, but my sleep was all over the place. It was still like, but I still had like, I had this kind of like, there was a lot of fear, but there was also this kind of like, oh my God, things make sense. And then it was kind of like somehow like mixed with this. So there was no this honeymoon period in terms of like, sleeping great. There would be like, like occasionally there would be really nice nights, but then there will be all-nighters, 4 all-nighters in a row and so on and so on. But there was still like this kind of like a certain amount of relief from knowing what is going on with me. But I would say I had the honeymoon period later. I would say it was around like maybe 3-4 months later, where I just started having like perfect sleep. For 4 months, I had like seriously, like every night was just great. And during this time, that was my honeymoon period. This is where I slowly started like, having this feeling like, oh my God, I'm done. There's no work to be done. And I think this is what many people experience when they have like very quick start. They get this kind of like confidence, which for me is a little bit like excessive confidence, like too confident.
Honeymoon confidence.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like in a relationship, you're like,
everything is taken lightly. Everything is which is like, it's understandable. It's understandable. Like I had this exactly. I felt like I was even, I remember like I was getting a little bit more like kind of like how to say, like cocky. And this was like, I nailed it. I know how to, like I'm recovered, cool, awesome. Even if speed bump happens, I'm gonna be over it like very soon. There is like no worries, no problems, and so on and so forth. But when the speed bump actually hit, the first one after a long time, this is when like frustration was like, poof, like I just like plunged into despair really quickly. And then it was like, again, like the moment when there was like a lot of like speed bumps. I don't know if it was like one huge speed bump or many tiny ones. It's like, it doesn't really matter, but there was a lot of suffering after that honeymoon period. So I would say that the journeys, they can look differently. Someone can have like very slow start, nothing is changing, but like nothing is changing on the surface, but underneath there is a work going on. Some people can have like instant this confidence boost, but then it goes like when it starts going like this, that's when they get a lot of fear. And then for someone, let's say like for me, it's like there's no like instant like honeymoon period in the beginning. It was like all over the place, and somewhere in the middle you get honeymoon period, which I think is like still a part of the process. Everyone kind of go through this sooner or later, but I would say like normalizing any sort of patterns there, that can be helpful. Because when a person like has this, let's say I'm doing this work and I'm changing my perceptions and working with my beliefs, but nothing is changing, something is wrong with me. That doesn't have to be like that there is a problem. Actually, it might be that's how the journey is unfolding for them.
And some people, myself included, things got worse well before they got better at the beginning, because I was changing. Part of it was, okay, I'm going to dismantle some of the routines I'm doing around sleep. I'm going to stop doing certain sleep efforts. Like I'm going to stop repressing certain painful emotions. I'm going to start allowing certain thoughts and working. So it's like, there's a lot of change that can happen. And when you're in these states of, fear, survival states, really, that can be read as a threat. And so I found, actually, as I started my recovery process, everything got worse. My hyperarousal got worse. My sleep everything was just, I actually had to slow down what I was doing because I was excited, but my survival brain was horrified
Yeah.
with everything. And I was just like, it was like pulling away every single safety blanket all at once.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I don't need to do it that way. But even so, even going a little bit more slowly, it was still this, the change of starting something new, the change of doing things differently, felt very threatening, not to me consciously, but to the part of my brain that had learned a lot of fear and was in the pattern of trying to protect me, really. So I had that experience where things were, you know, if you look at it from just like symptoms, worse at the beginning.
Yeah. I think
And
it's very helpful that you mentioned this, because many people like might come into this like work expecting that it's going to be kind of like on like upward.
yeah,
It's not like this exactly, because if
not,
it's like, if you are coming into this experience knowing that, okay, I'm gonna work on this, I'm ready to work on this, but I'm not, I don't want it to get worse. I don't want it to get worse. Then it's usually like, you know, there's going to be some frustrations. It doesn't mean that it's actually going to be worse, but having this kind of expectations that it's going to be just like perfect from now on, and it's just going to increase like the quality, that's also not quite realistic. Because for me, this is what I actually realized, that never judge the progress based on the symptoms, like,
yeah,
or the surface, like how the night actually looks. Because when I'm analyzing my nights, let's say like looking at now, like at my on my whole timeline, I was experiencing all-nighters in the beginning, and I was experiencing them in the at the end as well. So in the form of how the night actually goes is not different. It can be like, you never know where, like, even if you're experiencing, like, let's say you've been doing like work, and then, you know, you've seen some better times and then some speed bumps and so on, and then now you're having some rough time and you feel like I'm going backwards, or you're trying to judge yourself where you are on the timeline. The outcome of the night says nothing about where you are actually. Because for me, exactly, it was like I was way at the end of my, you know, journey, and I had also all-nighters there. My relationship with them was changing, but they were still there. Or sometimes like the hyperarousal, the intensity could pop up somewhere like closer to the end, very similar to the square one, like intensity. But it's not the same. It's not the square, like
I
square one,
agree.
the
I
same
agree.
fear. So yeah, like, so I would say that this is also very helpful to set expectations in a way that even like it's okay if it gets bumpier, maybe even bumpier before like the journey is started, because we're facing some like really, you know, fundamental beliefs that we're running this fear for a long time. Some turbulence is expected. You're like stirring the water, trying to, you know, find the monster. So there's going to be some amount of the, like, you know, the ripple effect there. So it doesn't have to happen actually, but being ready to face that can be helpful.
Yeah, I agree completely. One other thing I see a lot, we talked about timelines already, but I think that's one other thing that when people are putting a lot of timelines on themselves can slow things down a lot. Or when they're comparing this person's timeline, right? And we all do it. We all do the comparison game. But even just noticing you're doing it can be helpful, because when you're comparing and you're putting a lot of time pressure on yourself, it's because then it's like, well, I should be here, but I'm not. Or you're looking into the future. It's like, well, this is where I want to be, and this is where I am now. And the moment we do that, we just create so much, that's the suffering, whatever that delta is between this is where I am and this is where I should be, that space is just created suffering for yourself.
Exactly.
And I think we all do it. It's so human, but just noticing that is happening can lessen the suffering and just how difficult, you know, because the recovery process is hard inherently. So I think it's important to see the things that are maybe making it harder or are preventing you from developing a sense of momentum for yourself in it. That's hard, right? Because it's almost like we have to generate a little bit of our own momentum through this. And when we're putting hard timelines on ourselves, we're comparing to other people's timelines. or if we're again, like defining our progress by our, like, what is our symptoms today? It kind of steals momentum from
Yeah.
us. It takes away our ability to feel like we're on the path, right?
Yeah.
I'm going in the right direction, and it takes that away and creates more of a stuck feeling,
Or
a
sense of
feeling of urgency, failure, and where there is no failure. So it's like a false sense of
Yeah.
failure as well. And so I can see that kind of really come into play with people really commonly, very, very
Yeah.
commonly. Did you do that with yourself as well at the timeline? Did you struggle?
Totally. I had
Yeah.
this, like, there was always time component for me. Like the brain was just going there. Like,
It loves to do
oh,
that.
it's already like 1 year mark. Like, hello, what's going on? And these kind of things. But now I'm realizing, like, timeline is an illusion. It does not exist. Like there's no timeline really. It's just the assumption that there is some sort of like it's the brain's search for logic, like for some sense of control, and that's why it creates such things as timeline. In reality, like now we are talking about timeline, right? But I feel like timeline can only like be helpful or useful when you are already not on that timeline. You can just observe it as something that was already done, and you just look back at it, and then you can pinpoint some like highlights and like lows and ups, and but when you're like in the middle of the timeline, you have no idea where it ends, where you are. Like it's even impossible even figure it out, like where you are on timeline while you're still on timeline. And this is what I felt like for me. I don't know, maybe that's also your experience or not, but for me, like the recovery was not like completing the timeline, but it's more like there was this kind of like perceptual timeline. And as I was kind of becoming less interested in that, I kind of stepped off of it. So the timeline, I kind of kept it like open-ended, like the recovery, like whatever this problem solving thing, I left it open-ended, and I just let my brain, like if it wants to keep figuring out stuff, I just let it figure out stuff. There are much more important things for me to tend to rather than figuring out sleep. There's something I cannot figure out, and I don't care when this timeline ends. So for me, it was like really like you hop off the train, and the train can keep going for some time, and you don't care where it goes and when it ends. So for me, that's how it felt. Like for me, like the timeline never had this like moment of this is the end. This is like this is where I cut. This is more like I was perceptionally somewhere here, and I'm just like jump off of it and just went the other way. I don't know if that's something that like resonates or.
I think that's wonderful. I had a different experience. I want to say I got really lucky on the timeline front with myself because I never got on the train of the timeline. I never did. But it's only because I have a history of chronic health challenges. And I've talked a little bit with you about this stuff, and I won't go into that here, but I had already had so many experiences around applying a timeline to myself in that scenario, around the timeline for healing for that, and had already experienced how it doesn't work that way. Essentially, how I couldn't put a timeline on my healing process. And no matter how hard I tried, it just created more suffering for myself, more frustration. So because I had had that experience and I'd had it multiple times in a different context, by the time I got to my insomnia recovery, I knew it was pretty much the same idea. And so I knew, and I thought, oh, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going there. And I even told myself at the beginning, I remember thinking, you know what, I've been in this for 5 years. If it takes another 5, okay. And I know that some people will hear that and be like, oh my God, that's horrible. That's not comforting at all. But for me at the time, that was comforting because it was my way of releasing putting a timeline on myself whatsoever. And that's why I didn't track it. I really didn't think about it. So I was lucky in my insomnia that I was not putting time pressure on myself, only because I already had learned all that before. And came into like, oh, wait, I see what my brain wants to do. And I know it's not going to be helpful. So we're going to, let's skip this one.
I think this is where people eventually kind of like, arrive at this point when they realize like the timeline is what's like the concept
It
or
can hold
idea
you
of the
back.
timeline, it's holding you back
It can
actually.
hold you back. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
So it's always like whenever I'm hearing like someone is like saying like, yeah, but I'm afraid that I'm making my timeline, prolonging my timeline of recovery, and thinking about timeline in general, like having like believing in that there is a timeline is what's more prolonging recovery rather than whatever the obstacle is right now they're experiencing, because everything is kind of like possible to kind of like face and experience and you know live through this experience, right? But at some point we need to let go of this expectation of that pressure of like you know like you're in the rush, you need to exactly that's for me like I usually like the way I think about this is like, you know, if we think about like the timeline in trying to somehow like control it, timeline is not our business, to be honest. Like our timeline is not like it's not something we can change. It's not something we can like remove or speed this up. There are no like shortcuts. Even but this is the truth. Like even though like we are talking about like all possible traps, what the mind can prepare for us, all the possible speed bumps and you know the typical like fears, right? Even though like a person like hears about them, right? It still doesn't prevent them from experiencing them.
Yes, that's true. I think the most it really is noticing it, going, oh, wait, this is from okay, here my mind's doing that. I'm doing that. You can start to get better at seeing when you're falling into the traps. Because again, we're all just human. The only reason I didn't fall into the timeline trap with myself was because I already had so many times.
Because you
otherwise
fell for it for a long time, like before.
Yeah. Otherwise I completely would have.
Yeah.
Right. So it's we all have to go through whatever our own experience with it. And I think learning about it can help us see when we're there. Oh, wait, I'm doing that. Oh, wait, I'm in the comparison game. I'm putting time pressure on myself. I'm you know, defining progress as my symptoms every day. It's natural to do all these things. It's helpful to bring more awareness into it so that then we have a little bit of choice in the matter. So we don't stay there perpetually in that, because, you know, with all of those things, whether it's the symptoms or the time pressure, really what we're doing unintentionally is we're constantly telling ourselves and our survival brain that's really scared, like, I'm not okay right now. 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 And we want to be doing the opposite of that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this makes so much sense. And what one of the things that also came to my mind is that the idea that like we often feel like, okay, so there is somehow something that I can do to control the recovery itself, not just the sleep or my feelings, but I also can control my recovery. I can control the intensity of it. I can control the speed of it. You know, like I noticed this kind of like subtle, like you know, desires like from people, but also I remember like I experienced that myself because I wanted to find like shortcuts. I wanted to not go through this experience. And this is where it was like hard truth that I had to realize is that like just like I don't control my sleep or like the outcome of the night, I don't control like whether I have hyperarousal or what kind of thoughts I have, I also don't control where recovery takes me. So it's also helpful to kind of like, I know it's paradoxical, but relax into like this not knowing where in being okay, whatever it brings.
Well, I think a lot of it is at the larger sense is like we want control. We just want control over things.
Exactly.
And we think we lost control over our sleep, but we never really had control over our sleep. We just didn't know. It was like we had a false sense of control. Like we do in so many areas of our life where we think we have control, but we don't. There's certain things, sure, but for the most part, there's a lot of stuff that we just don't have control over. But I think nobody likes that. We don't like uncertainty. We're really uncomfortable. So I think a lot of it is at the bigger scale is like getting more comfortable with the discomfort of uncertainty in this, but also in a bigger sense. And that's very hard. That's very, very hard.
I totally agree with that. And I was wondering, like, was it also feeling like did it also feel like this for you, that the speed bumps were also like a humbling experience? Like it was kind of, you know, like the illusions of control that the brain can accumulate when things are going well, like having like believing that, oh, I'm somehow I figured it out somehow, right? So we grow this kind of sense of like superiority over even our past selves. And then when the speed bump hits, for me at least, it was like very kind of like sobering and like humbling experience. Like I had to be humbled, like in terms of like, no, I haven't gained any control. I did not get any superhuman powers of, you know, controlling like how my night is going to be. So, and with that kind of like moment of this like humbling, there was some ease was coming to it. It's like, I don't have to figure, there's no, it's like, you know, there is this phrase of like, with great power comes great responsibility. This is the opposite, actually. It's actually relieving, like when you don't have control, meaning like, with no power, there's really like, there's no responsibility for yourself to figure out how to make sleep happen. You just like, you know, just let the night take whatever it takes you. So it's kind of like also, I don't know, like if that makes sense, but it was just like,
it does. I'm thinking back, and I had I didn't really have that exact experience, but I can see how it would be a humbling experience, right? If it's especially wrestling a lot with that control piece of things. And I think it's, you know, what can we control? What can we not control? We can't control what our sleep is going to look like night by night basis, but we can control how we're going to perceive that, how we're going to show up to that and move through it. So maybe I wasn't humbled. Maybe I still need to be humbled, because I think I shifted my perspective of where do I have agency here? It's not over here like I thought it was, or like I thought it should be, right? Like that's the years of struggle, is me trying to apply control and, you know, in the wrong place. And for me, it was like, I really don't have it here, but oh gosh, I have so much agency over here. And let me shift into that place, I guess.
No, I think it's very helpful also to realize, because this is very valuable, because I would say I can imagine the person goes like, okay, there is nothing like nothing to control here. There can be this feeling of like helplessness. This kind of like I'm, you know, completely how to say, like lost, and there's nothing else for me to do. But I would say like, like in some areas really we cannot change that, but there is like, from this clarity, like, okay, there are certain things that I cannot change, but then there are things that I still can. So like shifting focus on that can be really helpful, because that's where the power comes. For me, this is that's what I recently started using, like this phrase is like becoming not a prisoner to the night, or like this kind of like to insomnia, but more like the author of your night.
I love
choose
that.
how you spend wakefulness, not in a way that, oh, I'm choosing to sleep 8 hours with a solid uninterrupted sleep. That's not something what we control, but I can choose like to make myself as comfortable as I can possibly be during this night. I can do something, I can decide to not do anything, and it's this is my free choice. And finding freedom within even the seemingly impossible circumstances, that's where the power, like this kind of like agency that can be gained.
Exactly. Yes, I completely agree. It's shifting the perspective, because in that sense, we have immense power, so much more than I think we are even aware of or know when we're going through this process, because we can feel really helpless. And I think a big part of the recovery process is realizing that we're not helpless. We are powerful. And you have agency in this place where we didn't feel like we had any before.
Exactly, because there is no longer this illusion that there must be the perfect thing I can do, and then it's gonna, you know, fix my sleep. But then realize there's no such thing, so basically I'm free to do whatever I want. And it's also like this realization can come like with a lot of sense of this relief and empowerment, basically. This is what for me, that was often like this the case, that like the big one was for me just knowing that I don't have to get up when I cannot sleep. I don't have to always push myself to go, you know, to another room. But then when I would notice myself hanging too much in my bed and not letting myself out, and I would feel this limitation, I feel like I'm a prisoner to be in my bed whole night, sleepless, then I would realize, wait a second, I can't leave bed. Why do I have to stay there? Like, I don't own anyone to stick to some stupid rules. Like, I can go and, do whatever I want. I can just like look out the window and then come back in 30 seconds. There's no rule. There's no like, there is no some sort of like, guidelines that, okay, this is how you're supposed to meet your wakefulness. Because there's nothing limiting than the idea that there is only one right way to spend this. And when you experience sleeplessness, this is how you have to deal with it. Because when we have all these like requirements, all these obligations, and of course it's like, for me, it's very difficult to accept the wakeful night. But when I know that if wakeful night happens, I'm free to do whatever the hell I want. It's like, it just gives me so much like relief.
Yeah, I agree. I really enjoyed this today. I'm glad that we got together, and I feel like we could continue to talk for hours about even just this topic, but
absolutely,
unfortunately we have to begin to wrap up. But I'm so glad we made time for this today. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that it was helpful for everybody listening.
Definitely. I really hope that, like people are benefiting from this. And I was also thinking that maybe, we can do it more often, or maybe like, some other time, maybe we can
This
pick
was
another
the
topic.
one time. No, I'm kidding. Yes,
no,
of
just
course.
One time. Yes, like exclusive.
This was the one.
yeah,
absolutely. It'd be so much
really
fun.
nice.
It would be so much fun. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Michelle, for being here, and we'll see each other soon.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Bye, everyone.